Hey everyone, my name is Uthris and welcome back to Planet Coaster. We'll be working on something a little bit different for our theme park today. We are, of course, continuing work on the sci-fi park, and what I want to do is make a Sidewinder. I've been naming this series Elite Dangerous and Planet Coaster for a while, and besides just the entrance and the F-63 Condor ride skin, I haven't actually done much in the Elite Dangerous theme specifically, and that's because we don't really have towns and cities that we can go on to on foot, and so there's not a whole lot of reference material to use to directly influence our items. But right now, what I'm going to be building this episode is a Sidewinder. It's going to be relatively simple, and you might notice if you guys play Elite now that I technically already messed up a little bit. So you can see that I did slope and make it into a little bit of a wedge, which is accurate, and these initial kind of corner pieces are accurate as well. The problem is that I don't think I made it quite wedge-like enough. It came out a little too boxy for my liking, and it's not quite up to probably par with something that someone could make, say, out of even paper craft. So it's a little wonky of a build, but it's gonna work for what I'm going to be using it for. I'm going to be releasing it as a standalone model for you guys, so you can use it in your own parks. But the main purpose I am making one of these is that we will be making the Sidewinder Bar and Grill, and that is going to be kind of the main restaurant people will run into as they get off of our rail system. So, in my opinion, the easiest way to go about building this ship, and how I plan to probably build most of the ships that we're going to be referencing in this park, is that I'm going to build a skeletal kind of outer frame, kind of a fuselage, so you could say, and then I'm going to be covering it using the wonderful scenery items that are just kind of these thin plates, and we're going to try and just basically wrap it with the skin. And what that's going to do is allow us to cheat a little bit in placing objects on the surface, as everything's going to be pre-aligned to its pre-designated angle, and at that point we will be basically free to just kind of slap details on top. Now, there is a little bit of a problem with this, is the fact that this is the first ship that I made, and so there's going to be some rough spots in there. We won't have quite the paneling texture that I would like to have on the Sidewinder. Elite Dangerous is fairly detailed in their ship designs, and so I don't think I captured quite the likeness, though I will say, for its purpose, for it to be a decoration on top of a restaurant, I don't think I necessarily need those details, because it's not a full recreation of the ship. Now, maybe when we make a Cobra, I'll go into a little bit higher of a detail resolution, but just for this, I'm fine with just getting some of the surface detailing correct in the right spot, and some of the coloration highlights, and then we'll kind of go from there when we design the building itself that this thing's going to be interacting with. Again, this is kind of a longer process to go through and wrap these skins, and trying to get these little angles to line up as smooth as possible, as close as possible, so that you're not going to see any, hopefully, lines or cracks running through the hull. That's not something that I want to be there, so it's going to be a lot of zooming in, a lot of rotating around, getting really close to try and get these finite details, and even removing sections, kind of starting over in little areas, and then moving on from there, kind of in a rinse repeat kind of style. Now, luckily, because the Sidewinder is roughly symmetrical, we can do the top half and kind of copy that over in terms of the ride skin itself. And my phone is buzzing, which is not considerate to you guys, so let me just mute that. There we go. So what I'm going to do is figure out these corners. These corners are a little bit of a challenge. Once you get down to such a small area with two awkward angles, it becomes a little tough. As you can see, we can fill in some of the larger gaps with some larger pieces and get down to the nitty gritty, but then it just kind of comes down to winging it as best as possible to fill in just this little bit here, using one of the triangle pieces to get us partially the way there, and then kind of just covering it up with a small section as well. At this point, we'll just copy and flip it over. Very quick and simple. I am building this thing onto a grid, and what that's allowing me to do is save this as one solid building. Now, the nice thing is that there's only one grid piece on here at this point, and they added a function to rotate scenery items if they're a blueprint any direction and give us full Z-axis control. So if you guys want to set this vehicle up in a turning kind of banking motion, you can do that. You just have to delete the grid item, select it all again. You're gonna have to do the box select at that point, and then you will be moving it just like you would a scenery piece, and you can move and bank the item in whatever direction you're going to start out with. So main thing that I wanted to lay out first are the hard points. The Sidewinder does have two small hard points on it, and a nice little red line that goes along the surface here and also interacts with the hard point placement. So you can see, trying to figure out what to use for materials to get some of these detailing pieces in. In fact, I end up going over and replacing what we were using. Instead of using that stone, we're going to use the boards. The boards are just the cleanest, kind of most solid color that you can get currently, and so I kind of liked this a little bit more than having that stone texture appear when we got close enough. So overall, this is a pretty clean build. It's not really messy. There's not a whole lot of jagged lines or anything like that. In fact, I was rather surprised at how smooth just the surface became when we kind of wrapped that skin around, just because there wasn't really any Z fighting coming from all those pieces. Now, it's probably because they're all colored the same color. There could be Z fighting, but we're just not seeing it because the color is not really changing like it normally would. Here, this is a kind of directional thruster area, and we're just going to basically be blocking in sections for and referencing certain mechanics that are on these ships in Elite Dangerous. So we're going to have a couple of these thrusters on the corners, some headlights up front there. I do end up replacing those with something a little bit different off camera, just to make it pop out a little bit better and make it look a little bit more unique. There'll be a lot of little details in going in with the surface. Though I will say, it is basic. It's just a basic thing. It's very reminiscent of, say, like something you might build with Lego. So you're gonna have, a lot of the finer details just missing because it's not really designed to show those finer details. Here is where the cockpit is on the Sidewinder. Now, I should probably note to you guys that this thing's actually pretty close to scale. The Sidewinder, I believe, is about 21 meters wide. It is about 15 meters, tail to nose, and then it is about 5 meters tall. So I did use boards when we were framing the initial skeleton to be close to those dimensions. It's not exact. We don't have like a 1 meter board to try and get that. But, for the width, for example, I used two 8s, which give us 16, and then 2 4s, which give us, I think, 22. So instead of 21, we're 22 meters wide. And it is fairly accurate, and it's pretty funny because in Elite Dangerous, we don't have the scale of some of these items next to each other. And so people have made videos of these things next to, like, you know, Big Ben or the other ships in the game, football fields. But it's pretty interesting to see it in just the scale of Planet Coaster because, one, there's a whole lot of people walking around. We already have buildings laid out. And you can see just how big this thing is just compared to our little monorail station and how many people fit inside of that. So, obviously, Elite Dangerous, you know, the scale of their ships are fairly large and impressive. So unlike Star Citizen, where you're not getting that really close-up personal look to some of these, I think they are rather beautiful and nice. And hopefully once they add getting out of your ship and walking around, that'll just come through even more so. And plus, if you have VR, I think that kind of sells it pretty hard as well. Additional, you know, just black kind of detailing here, changing the color of the red stripe. It was a little too red, and then bulking up the cockpit. So let's go ahead and skip to real time. Okay, so here we are. This is kind of our little Sidewinder that we're going to be using, and somehow, in some way, I haven't quite fully decided that yet, to decorate the Sidewinder Bar and Grill, kind of the initial restaurant off the monorail station. We got some orange, black, red elements on this thing. The shape, as I said, isn't quite right. It's not something that I can go back in and fix now. We have so many elements on here. And by the time I noticed, it was just kind of too late, and we just had to accept the fate of it being a little bit boxier than it normally would. But overall, I think it turned out well. And, you know, there's compromises that you have to make when you're doing this. One, to keep the part count low. We're at 722 parts. A lot of that was manually placed. Not really using copy and paste, just because you can't really copy, say, this ventilation to this side, just due to the angles being different and the advanced move being a little awkward on them. That it's actually a little bit faster to just remake it real quick. Other little elements here. Let's go ahead and set the lighting so we can really see some of the details. Here are the hard points for the two small weapons, and it's funny, in Elite Dangerous, when you see a small hard point like this, you're like, oh, well, you know, it has to be a small gun. But, I mean, if you just look at it, in fact, we can pick up a person or gnats. We can't actually raise them off the ground. But you can just see how big this hatch is compared to the rest of our building and the ship in general. As I said, this is roughly to scale of the Sidewinder, so you're getting a whole lot in such a small package, and especially for a free starter ship. You can see it's taking up the whole square here, and it is definitely fairly large. You can see we can copy it around as a building right now. In fact, that's how it's saved as a blueprint, as I explained in the speed build. But to simply turn it into a scenery item, all you have to do is come in here, edit it, and get rid of this back block. So let's go in here and delete that. And this is actually how we got the screenshot for this episode. We simply highlight this and hit move, and that's going to move the track too. You got to be careful about, you know, not selecting other things with this if you want to try and get this exact rotation. So it's moving around exactly like a building. The only difference is the fact that we have full rotational control. So you can set up, say, maybe there's a Sidewinder flying over the initial cities section, going over to land at the other area. But it's pretty cool to see just how big that is. Like, even at ground level, if I can not clip through all the buildings here, like, that is huge. Like, that looks like something from Star Wars to me. It's like some type of dropship, some federal dropship coming in terms of just size. Other than that, you know, not a whole lot of panel work. If I were to go in and redo this, what I would probably do is, instead of jumping straight into these like pinstriping detail elements, we would probably go in and work on just the paneling first, and then this detailing over it. I didn't really think it through quite 100% when building this, but I think that's a tip for you guys to follow in the future. Let's switch this to PM. There we go, get a little bit of a different lighting kind of segment. And also, beyond that, you know, not a whole lot of details in the back. Again, this thing is supposed to be connected to a building, but, you know, there is supposed to be a door element here to board the ship. We have the engines in this section, and in fact, I did put SFX in there, so the engines do glow and light up. We have little area lights on the corners to represent the directional thrusters, which I think is pretty cool. They actually look kind of similar. They're very round. They have that grate over them with the blue backlight. And in fact, if we set it to nighttime, like so, it does give it a nice kind of blue hue around here. You can see the headlights partially lit up. And just the overall blue color is pretty cool, even at night here. The underside, relatively plain. I didn't want to get into too much detail on the underside. I didn't deem it too important. But I did get the cargo hatch at least, and some of the under ventilation and some of the heat sinks on the side. So, that's going to be it for today's episode. A little bit shorter, a little bit more compact onto this one item. But this is sadly just time constraints and things like that is why we're just going to go ahead and move on. I could just make a fleet of this stuff. Like, I mean, I could just copy this thing around and just make 1,000 Sidewinders. This is why it's free in the game, people, because it's this easy to make a Sidewinder. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed today's episode, feel free to subscribe for more creative goodness. Go ahead and hit that like button if you guys want to see some more Planet Coaster and Elite Dangerous being mixed together here in this series. Go ahead and check out the other series that we just started, the Build series, where we are continuing work, not in this park, but making other cool things from other sources.